that your ideology is going to go extinct. That's what I think. The numbers seem to show this. So,
Well, I
um,
mean, once upon a time, not so long ago, the numbers were showing the opposite.
And we're back. We've got President Sunday on the right, Andrew Wilson on the left. Thank you guys for being here. Before we get into it, President Sunday, take a second, shout yourself out, tell everybody where they can find you.
Thank you very much. You can find me on President Sunday, spelled exactly how it sounds, on YouTube and Twitter, but who the hell cares about Twitter?
All right, and Andrew Wilson, shout yourself out, tell everybody where they can find you.
yeah, my name is Andrew Wilson. I'm the host of the one and only Crucible. I debate a bit on the channel and also host a ton of other content as well. And we host debates. I
Bad
appreciate
super
President
combo.
Sunday being here
Very
for this
bad
debate.
super combo.
And I appreciate Senator Shapiro and the audience for showing up for it.
All right, and reminder,
Big
the
father
topic tonight
fascist.
is Christian
Hello,
populism.
vodka.
Andrew Wilson defending the affirmative.
We're gonna be
President Sunday
judging this
defending the
debate.
negative. Before we get into
Judge
it,
it
one
with
last
me.
reminder, please hit the like, share,
Participate.
subscribe button. Send in those super chats. I know we got a few already. I'll be showing them on stream or on screen as we go through, and we'll
Even
actually
the
read and
damage
address
from that?
all of them at the end of the debate. And if you want to call in and ask a question directly, get the stream link from the mods in the Discord. You can call in, ask your question directly to either debater. Make sure to get in there quick because sometimes the queue fills up and we just run out of time. So that being said, we're going to get right into it. We did brief backstage, and we agreed that Andrew will be going first. Both of you will get 7
Andrew.
minutes for your opening statement.
Yeah.
If Andrew wants to take his time, I'm actually going to waive. I'm keen to get into the back and forth.
Go first, Andrew.
Well, Andrew, whenever
You're-
you're ready, you got 7 minutes on the clock for your opener.
Well,
It's well how mad these
here's to
Crucible
hoping
guys
that
are
this
about
is a
Vosh.
good
They are?
contentious debate. Can you
Yeah?
guys still hear me okay?
It's crystal
you're
clear
good.
compared to before.
Perfect. Okay. Made sure to write this in such a way that there's plenty of meat on the bone.
That's right. And today we're gonna be reacting to 3 debates back to back. It's gonna be
For President
crazy.
Sunday to come after
gonna
it
be
because I'm also
wild.
eager to get into it.
We're gonna be playing
So let me just
fighting
start
games
off with
and
the
react
opener here.
to debates.
Humanity is a culmination of tribes. The most basic being, of course, the family, and then outwardly the village, the
Tribes.
state, and then to the
Oh
nation.
my god, this is already bad.
Culmination of stupid left-wing thinkers have tried their best to convince the world that this isn't true. We aren't tribal.
It's not true.
In fact, that we are all interchangeable widgets. That with simply material changes, we will end with the same results everywhere on planet Earth.
Culmination of the
between
tribes.
So they have tried their damnedest to eliminate nations, eliminate family units,
What?
eliminate all traditional ways of living altogether. An interesting result
Nations is-
has happened from this leftist
Okay.
experiment that they likely couldn't predict
Okay,
because of
stop.
course
Stop. A nation is something that's totally different from a tribe. Come on, Andrew Wilson. What does a nation have to do with tribes? A nation is such a new concept. This is so stupid. Eliminate nations. What does that have to do with tribes?
they are so smart and educated that they were able to educate themselves right out of seeing reality. The world is currently just as tribal as it's ever been. It's going to keep being tribal, and leftists are going to keep failing in their path to utopia
Yes,
because they're
brag
unable
about
to
not
adjust
being
to this
educated.
truth.
Well done.
The truth is that absent religion, secularists and progressive leftists don't have anything to offer you except materialism. Ultimately, this leads to a death sentence for their cultures, which seem to barely ever be able to get off the ground before they completely eradicate themselves. We see this
Oh,
with
I
communism
remember that
and the
debate. We
destruction of the
reacted
church.
to it.
We see it in Western nations embracing
remember.
secular policies, being unable to reproduce themselves, and having to rely on immigrants from mostly theist nations, and we see it now right here in the United States. Christianity isn't cherished by the left, but instead it's ridiculed for the universalism which God demands of his ethical
I'm
codes
Jewish.
to
I
humanity.
don't ridicule anything.
Well, as you can imagine, this creates even more tribalism. The left, in response to this, tends to pervert in order to reduce
Pervert?
the numbers of the opposing tribe. They take Christianity and Christian churches and they move an Enlightenment egalitarian
I
message
know.
into them using
It's
leftist
like-
outreach programs.
What are you
This has
saying?
done a pretty good job of destroying Protestantism in the United States, but it's had an
Did it?
unintended consequence, which is that Protestants were the more easygoing of the Christian sect.
I'm pretty sure Protestants are doing pretty well in the US. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure Protestants are fine. Maybe I'm wrong.
And as you can see, as their
It
numbers
feels to me
diminish
like
over
Protestants
time,
are doing
the
just
core church's
fine
power is
in the
growing.
US.
Catholicism, Orthodoxy, growing worldwide,
I-
and they're going to continue to do so.
okay.
As Protestant churches succumb to a leftist perverse message, the people move to an even more of what the left might consider a radical Christian message and institution. They haven't stopped tribalism with secular thought, just exacerbated it. Ultimately, every philosopher who has ever
It's so incoherent.
tried to replace theism with anything other than theism has come up short. This is because ethical universals require justification. The left can't give those to you, at least not in a way that doesn't require years of indoctrination and training to understand, and even then they tend to fall apart at the slightest scrutiny. The goal, Christian nationalism or Christian populism or Christian futurism, these are all essentially the same,
No, they're not.
is to take the largest global tribe
It just shows that
in
you don't
existence,
understand
which
these
is Christians,
terms.
and tell them that it's okay to have power.
But it's
That
okay.
their
You're not.
morality
You
is
didn't
actually
educate
superior to
yourself out of
secularist morality, and that
reality.
people actually thrive better and do better under rulers who have ethical standards. Also, since we have the biggest tribe, frankly, who gives a shit what the other tribes who aren't as big as us think about that?
Who is the biggest tribe? Wait.
Symphonia is what this is called. The church and state working in tandem for the good of the people they rule.
Oh
See, the
no.
left currently has a false sense of security. This is due to their ideology being
That's the
materialistic
worst.
and ultimately short-sighted because of their
There
materialism.
should be an
They
absolute
think that because they
separation of
have
church and the
control of the
state.
smallest and least populated centers of the world, that they are themselves demigods.
What?
Yet they have a population problem, and they are going to continue to import their undoing from theist nations that ultimately are much more lenient towards church authority. Christian futurism, nationalism, is about this. It's about us
stupid.
taking advantage over a few generations to position ourselves to take power away from the left and put it back in the hands of the
Of the
Christians.
church. This is horrible.
All right, is that your opening statement?
I hope-
All right, thank you for that opening statement, Andrew. And Sunday, given what Andrew said, do you still want to waive your opening statement, or do you want to exercise it?
I do indeed. I suppose there's a number of points that I want to interrogate here.
Well, do you hang on? Do you want an opening statement, or do you want to go straight to the back and forth?
If it's all right, straight to the back and forth.
All right, then, gentlemen, the floor is open. Before we get into it, want to remind you guys one last time: send in those super chats. I'll show them on screen as we
I heard that President Sunday did really well in this debate, so I'm looking forward to what this interrogation sort of entails. You know? I heard this is not just some shit show. I heard that this is like this is going to be good on President Sunday's side. I hate praise. I heard praising words. You know? So I'm looking forward to it. Together with all of you who are watching with me.
go,
you know.
and we'll actually read and address all of them at the end. And if you want to call in, ask a question directly to either debater, get the stream link from the mods in the Discord, and you can call in and ask a question directly. That being said, gentlemen, the floor is open. We're going to do roughly an hour to an hour and a half of open dialogue.
So I guess there were roughly three types of points that you brought up in that, Andrew. The first is you gave a statement about the essentiality of sort of the hierarchy of tribe, village, state, and nation. The second one was you suggested that God demands, if I'm misquoting you, by all means, please correct me. I was running pretty quickly. God demands universalism, and then at the end you said the goal of Christian nationalism was to take the largest global tribe, which is Christians, and tell them it's okay to have power. Which one would you prefer to dig into first?
It doesn't matter to me.
Doesn't matter to you. How about that first one? Let's talk about that. So, this tribe, village, state, nation sort of set of tiers that you've.
Tears. Sunday's approach was definitely interesting. I don't know how much he got out of it, but probably the best he could in front of the audience with his specific aesthetic, the Crucible audience being very aesthetic focused. Listen, I've got a great aesthetic. I should have a Crucible debate with someone.
You've outlined.
Don't know
Can-
who
can
yet,
you elaborate on
but-
that a little bit?
We're gonna make it happen.
Yeah, so it's my belief, and it's the Christian belief as well, that humanity is set up into a section of tribes. It seems to be
No, it's
obvious
not.
to
What?
everybody who looks at it. I don't think you would dispute that, would
That's
you?
not.
That it's obvious in Christian doctrine that humanity is distinguished into separate tribes. I mean, there's descriptions of tribes in the Bible, certainly, but I don't know if there's a claim that these have essential properties.
It doesn't. That is just a historical thing. It doesn't say that that's a property of humanity. No, it does not. Absolutely not. The Torah does not describe humanity as a bunch of tribes. It just describes the historical reality that was the case. And that's a big difference, okay? That's nonsensical. That's not smart.
Such. I mean,
Well,
certainly
they
if you're
do.
talking
Christianity is trying to make one tribe, Christians.
about
Our job is to make a single tribe, which is Christians, out of all nations.
fair enough. And so, like, there's obviously this stratification between different subgroups of humanity. There are different, like, worships. There are different, like, even ethnicities or whatever.
No, that's not true either. That's bullshit. No. Christianity is not trying to create a single tribe out of all the nations. That's actually incorrect. It's not fair enough. Christianity converted countries without trying to merge them together into a single tribe. Countries, states, and nations are a separate thing from a religious group. That's nonsense. Again, Andrew Wilson. President Sunday is being so nice. But what is being said here is such nonsense. Hello, I'm not here.
goal of Christianity, of course, is to fold all of these into one church. That's sort of
One
Correct.
church, but that's
One
not the same
tribe.
as one tribe.
All right. So when for example, you say that leftists characterize these
That's
as being
nonsense.
essentially non-existent. In a sense, you actually more or less agree with them because they're less real than, of course, the church body that would come to be after this sort of global conversion has taken place. Yes. Because
No,
presumably,
they would exist-
like
they
this
would
tribal
exist
existence
in-
wouldn't persist past like the unification of man.
They would exist within Symphonia.
within symphony.
We don't. Yeah, we don't
But
eliminate. the
Christianity
tribe.
does not.
We give unification through Christendom. That's the point.
Okay, but it's
So if you're
so it would
Greek,
be
you
a-
get to stay Greek,
yeah.
right? Nobody's saying that you can't stay Greek. That's why if you look at the Orthodox Church, you look at the Catholic churches, they do the same thing. They
So
usually
how
will
does
add
that
their ethnicity
unify?
in with the church? They'll say this is
Christian countries fight among each other. How does that unify anything? That's nonsense. Again. World War I. Hello? No? Am I the silly goober here? Ah, I lost.
just the Greek Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church. This is the Greek or Roman Orthodox Church, this type of thing. The tribe is able to stay intact. It just has a unification of glue, a
Interesting.
universal glue. And the universalism
Pretty
is
bad
the
glue
moral
if
ethical
the
system.
Parts are
So
fighting
what
one
we're-
another.
What we're trying to accommodate here is universalism through ethics.
Okay, that's interesting. So the because Christ is pretty explicit that in heaven there is no, for example, marriage bond, or I think even male or female, but tribe persists even into the 1,000-year reign on Earth. It's an
Well,
interesting-
okay. Well, you're talking. Are you talking about eschatology here? What do you mean?
I suppose in a sense, like when we're talking about like whether something is real, we're talking about whether something persists beyond convention, right? We're talking about whether it exists beyond simply how people behave and act. Like if an alien were to come to Earth, they would find these distinctions themselves in exactly the same way. That's how the contours of these things sort of persist. At least that's how I would think about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what's your kind of driving point here? So I mean, do you dispute that the entirety of human existence is essentially a makeup of tribes
Yes.
and nations, and that the universals
Oh,
are
yes.
what keep those tribes
yeah, I
together,
do.
generally theism?
I probably have some quibbles about what comprises these things and in what sense they have an existence as like a stable, constitutive mesh, I guess, that makes up mankind. As far as the universals are concerned, I mean, that begs a whole ton of questions, but I think the basic point about there being groups making up mankind, I think that's trivially obvious.
I keep
I suppose the reason why I'm asking,
But don't you want to eliminate the nation Sunday?
do I want to eliminate the nation?
Mm-hmm.
I would like to eliminate arbitrary divisions between people that have their own interest that can.
I haven't seen the whole debate, but Sunday seems very passive with Big Papa Farsoldo. My guess is that he was just his way of trying not to let Big Papa Farsos derail the convo like he always does. I suppose so, yeah. I mean, it is a way not to let the conversation become a shit show. Of course it's nonsense. Big Papa Farsos just believes in what gains his power. He might say his name is ironic, but we all know it isn't in reality.
Conflict, for example, with the interest of mankind. I would say also that this is probably dovetails well with your notion of symphonia, where
Well, what does that mean? What does that mean, though? What are the arbitrary notions which hinder us from? Are you talking about unification? Are you talking about like unification of global?
What do you mean when you say unification? Christian countries fight among one another. So can we really even talk about unification in that sense? I don't think so. I don't believe so. You know?
unification?
Well, let's talk in the context of this symphonia you described. For different groups to serve less than one master, in some sense, their identity has to be put beneath that of the collectivity. So obviously, for example, there will always be ways in which you can categorize people.
Wait, hang on,
according to
back
different
up, back up.
criteria.
I want to make sure I clarify this.
Sure, please.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I just
Not at
want you
all.
to clarify.
He does allude.
What's the order of
history, yeah.
operations? How you just described it?
Well, if you're talking, if the goal of Christianity and of Christian nationalism is the ultimate unification of all mankind, right?
Which,
Well, the
you know, again, Christianity that never sought to do. It just sought to convert people to the religion. It never sought to, like, unite countries or duchdoms or whatever into one. And if it doesn't, then what is the unification exactly? Right? Like, if countries that are Christian will still fight one another, then what's the unification exactly? You had in Hungary history where Catholic Austrian and their sided had been in clash with more Protestant Eastern side, which aligned more at times with the Turkish. Yeah, of course, because religion just serves politics. That has always been the case, not the other way around. It's not politics serving religion, it's religion serving politics. That's usually how that goes. Yeah, of course. So you cannot even speak of any sort of unification here. You had many different denominations of Christianity fighting against one another.
Unification of all mankind is going to be predicated on the interest of its parts, not superseding the interest of the whole. Or put another way, the veneration of the part is going to be under the veneration of the global church.
How big is Protestantism in Eastern Europe? Like, here, the split is essentially above the rivers in Protestant, above Catholic. Protestant Protestantism is not big in Poland at all. You have two main churches in Poland. You have the Catholic Church and oh my god, what's the name of the church? The Habsburg Church. Okay? You have the Habsburg Church and the Catholic. It's called Evangelical Augsburg Church. You know? I think that's the second biggest denomination in Poland. The Evangelical Habsburg thing. You know? Yeah, Eastern Europe is more Orthodox, but Poland is not all that Orthodox. It has some Orthodox churches, but it's more Catholic.
And of God, presumably. And so, while like it may be the case, there's still Greeks in their food and their culture and their whatever and so on and so forth, and just whoever else exists. They're not going to exist in the sense that we talk about the nation as the be-all, end-all of one's existence. You know, the whole perpetua mori shit, right? Like that's obviously going to fall away to some degree.
Why? It hasn't in the entire history of Christianity. It seems that these nations remain fully intact within their kind of tribal origin and their kind of people.
No, that's not nation.
While they adopt the universal ethical systems that Christianity provides and
Big
theism
Papa
provides
Fascist
to
does not
them.
know what a nation
Christianity
is.
did not, demand that there's some type of unification between these groups of people, other than they have the same ethics. That's
Like,
really
come on,
it.
Big Papa Fascist. That's not a nation. A tribe is not a nation. Like, learn your terms before you go into the debate. Also, Orthodox is not one single group either. I mean, of course. Like, the biggest example of Orthodox not being one single group would be the Orthodox Church of Lithuania and later Ukraine, and the Orthodox Church of Russia, which were historically two separate things and not one.
Well, didn't Christ very specifically say he comes to separate a man from his wife, a child from his parents, and so on and so forth? I mean, that strikes me as a
This
fundamental
is all
breakdown
bad
of the,
contextualization. So, like, what does that mean? What do you think that means, though?
Well, when I think of the list of categories that you provided, tribe, village, state, nation, I think the most fundamental of those...
family first. So
Family
family,
first.
then tribe.
Then tribe, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, this has been broken down at the
Yeah.
most basic level.
Of course.
The unity of the family is put below the unity of the church.
Wait,
and
where
the
are you
unity
from,
of the
Lenitas? I'm
church
sorry?
Seems, in the words of God himself, to come at the expense.
Oh, you're
of the unity of the
from...
family in
No,
Right.
family.
many cases.
Okay,
No,
I
no,
remember
that's
now.
The purpose
Dutch,
of symphony
right?
is there's no distinguishment between the two. The family is the comprising of the body of the church. The men are the comprising of the body of the church. This is an anti-materialist message. It's not a materialist message. So there is no distinction between the two. We are the makeup of the body of the church.
But you do
That
have...
is symphonia.
Fair enough, but I mean, you do have material bodies, and so it is still a material makeup, yes?
Well, I mean,
Like
yes,
the
I mean,
men
that's
as being
true,
parts
but that's
of
just
families, parts of
trivially
tribes,
true.
and yeah.
That's just trivially true. Like, yes,
Trivially
it's true, but so what? That's not really the point of the message. Like,
Well,
it's not. It really has no ultimate bearing. When you're talking about what you're offering, I guess the contrast here that I'm trying to show is that the offering of the leftist progressive is nothing except materialism. They can't really offer anything else. They don't offer you any sort of spiritual guidance or non-material guidance on anything, and they can't. They just reject it outright. So they don't have anything to offer people in this sense that is helpful to them finding some kind of purpose-driven life.
Can you specify that a little bit? Like, is there an example that comes to mind in which
Isn't the Augsburg
a
Church
secular or a progressive
from
or whatever
Austria-Hungary?
you prefer to call it ethic is specifically
Even
lacking?
isn't the Evangelical Augsburg Church from
You mean
As
the portions
Shahangari
of
or
secular
something?
ethics which are lacking.
Or no?
Yeah, if
Am I
there's a- if
mistaken
there's a
about that?
Degenerate
Degeneracy,
example.
abortion. I mean, the list is like ongoing. I could give you kind of an inexhaustive list of social problems which exist specifically because leftists only look at everything through the prism of materialism.
Well, how about degeneracy?
Okay, let's focus on degeneracy.
Sure. In what respect is, and if I'm mischaracterizing you, please let me know. In what respect is a leftist / progressive / secular ethical approach to? I'm presuming we're talking about sexual degeneracy in particular. In what sense is that those approaches to like sex and family ethics, say, in what sense is that categorically lacking? In a way
It
that
lacks virtues.
in a way that
So-
Christy, in a way, hang
Yeah,
on,
so it
what
lacks
sorry.
virtues. Let me give
No,
you
no,
a
no.
counter.
Oh yeah, just very
ahead.
quickly. I'm
Go ahead.
specifying the question just a little bit. In what way does it
What virtues does
fail
it lack?
to, I guess, supply the tools you need for an ethical system to be satisfactory? And what are the conditions of an ethical system to be being satisfactory? Oh, sorry, continue.
Virtues.
Threw me off there a little bit.
Virtues are necessary for an ethical system
Name them.
to operate, I think, in a way that gives people a non-material goal. Those are virtues. So let me give you an example of
Sure.
this.
Yes, please.
The
Please.
United States military and most militaries globally, they operate on their own sort of military unified codification of law, right? You would
Yeah.
agree with that. The United States, we have the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or the UMCA, right? Or whatever it's called, right?
I don't actually, but I get what you're saying.
Okay. Inside the Uniform Code of Military Justice, why do you think that a person can go to jail for having sex with an officer or an enlisted man or having sex with an officer's wife, even if it's consensual?
I suppose it could be multifaceted. I think the major one would be there.
Yeah,
are
I
serious
didn't mean
complications
it in
that
the
arise when you
chair.
have
I
superiors
meant
having
it.
sexual relations with
I didn't mean it like that.
subordinates or
I didn't
things
mean
of
it.
that sort.
Okay.
I mean, that itself is not
I'm
unique.
gonna pause because I'm gonna talk over President Sunday. I didn't mean it. I meant it if it came to Poland from the country, not if it was sort of, you know what I mean?
Universal. Like, for example, it was very common. In fact, it was encouraged for Roman soldiers to have sexual relations with each other. They thought it increased camaraderie to a certain.
That's
degree.
not true.
Is that not? Well, I read it was true.
No,
so.
it's not true. So, but that
I
aside,
see.
the reason for this is because inside of military culture, honor is very important, and it's always going to be important for any military, any standing military, that there's honor which is in place, because this is mostly an enforcement.
I'm not so sure about that. I don't know. Observing the current invasion of Ukraine by Russia, I'm not so sure if honor is so important to any standing army. Just executing prisoners of war on site, targeting civilians. I'm not so sure what's so honorable about that, but maybe Andrew Wilson will enlighten us. Maybe Andrew Wilson will explain to us
Arm,
how that one
which
works.
is comprised of men, and for men, honor highly important to them. And so when you look
yeah,
at what
sure.
the entailments are of honor,
Mhm.
one of the things that is an entailment of honor is your sexual conduct. What is honorable, what is not honorable. This is the same thing for almost all of the masculine virtues
It's
which
just
you'll see
nonsense.
most of these military codes operate off of. So you can't go and fuck your comrade's wife and not go to jail because you're violating an honor code. Now, from your progressive morality, actual moral code, Sunday.
Moral
If a guy's
code, Sunday.
wife
Mm-hmm.
has consented to having sex with a man, what's the moral conundrum here for you?
Well, the
True.
moral conundrum presumably would be that they're in some kind of covenantal relationship with somebody and they're doing this outside and in violation of that. But I mean, if, for example, you're simply talking about the analogy I was making before with the Roman soldiers was between Roman soldiers themselves, not with each other's wives. That'd be a fairly different story. But I think insofar as we're talking about people having entered into agreements, I think honoring those agreements is pretty universally, even among the most radical progressives, taken as something you should
Well, should they
probably...
go to jail?
Should they go to jail for
Yeah,
having...
should they go to jail? Should there
No.
be punitive punishments
No.
for consensual sex between adults
No?
in this circumstance?
No?
Should you go to jail for it?
between soldiers and an officer's wife,
Yeah. Or just another soldier's wife.
just another
No.
soldier's wife.
Yeah.
No? No?
Uh,
No, I don't think so.
I don't see that that's an appropriate response.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is the problem.
Which is
conflict
different,
in
by
the
the way, from saying
So
I
that-
don't think it's merited. I do think cheating is serious.
No, I understand. I get it. I understand what you're saying, the distinction here. But the distinction that I'm making is to say to you that inside of virtue-driven cultures,
Yes.
we don't see it as problematic to enforce when people violate virtuous behavior. We don't see that as being problematic. And so when we have kind of these
I agree.
talks about sexual ethics, we're talking about homosexuality, transgenderism, things like this,
Transgender.
it's always misframed as being some type of persecution or something like this.
Oh.
It really isn't. It has to do with an enforcement of morality based around
Oh.
virtues and what's considered virtuous and what
Okay.
is not.
So it's not
So if you are
persecution,
going
it's
to, just like in the
enforcing-
military, you're going to enforce these kind of high virtues. Why
Of
shouldn't
course, it's not persecution. It's just following virtues. Okay, sure. Don't hate the sin, hate the sinner. Yay. Am I right?
we do this with society? There's no particularly good reason that I can think of that Christians shouldn't be in charge and that Christians shouldn't be able to enforce the morality that they choose.
Fair
I don't
enough.
see why that would be problematic.
Fair enough. I'm following you there. Now, wouldn't, for example, how
I don't think that's fair enough. I think that's very not fair enough. I can give a very good reason why I would not like Christians to be in charge and to enforce their virtues in the way that Big Papa Fascist would like. It's because I would be jailed or something for being trans. There you go. Is that enough? I don't want to be jailed for being trans. That's why.
However, the targeted critique of things, for example, like unjust persecution, let's say, I'm adding that additional word there, would that not also imply by itself a specific, let's say, a pantheon of virtues and vices that are themselves being deployed to make those judgments? They may not necessarily align with yours, but clearly, for example, having an unjust prejudice against certain kinds of things, or having a particular attitude towards freedom, or having an overbearing attitude towards sexual relationships and so on and so forth. These seem to violate some kind of stable norm such that you can describe progressives and leftists and so on and so forth as being persistently hostile to them. That suggests to me that there's actually something, at the very least, the same order of an ethical system with its own virtues and vices taking place here. It doesn't seem like there's an absence. It seems like it's a difference.
True. President
So,
Sunday
okay.
is
So I want to
yeah.
make
Do you
sure I get
disagree,
this.
or-
Yeah. So hang on. I want to make sure I get this right. So I'm not straw manning your position.
Okay.
You're saying, wait, if there's a contrary position to your position, it seems like that's an ethical position.
Not
That's what
exactly.
you're saying.
So what you're saying is that what's specifically lacking from a secular progressive, it's like, could we let's just say secular?
I think
generally,
President
would that
Sunday's
Yeah,
doing
sure,
well.
that's fine.
Okay, what's
Doing
lacking
well.
from a secular perspective is the stable existence of a set of virtues by which to judge the actions of individuals in clear and legible terms, such that you can administer justice and maintain honor or things like that. But it seems to me that even though they're not stated as virtues, the consistency with which these particular things are treated de facto as vices and as things that are condemnable suggests to me that there is something equivalent, if unstated, also at
To
work on the
those,
secular side.
Right.
Yeah, I
unethical
believe that they
system,
have
so to speak.
whatever they perceive as being an ethical code. Sure.
Okay. And would you
Utilitarianism
concede?
could be one. There's all sorts of secular ethical codes, but
Sure.
these are generalities. When it comes to particulars, they seem to fail over and over and over
Can you
again.
give an example?
Secularism in general seems to fail when it comes to particulars, not in generals. So, kind of in a general sense, if they're talking about general prescriptions for society, they're talking about generally how society ought to be run. It all sounds good, but when it gets into particulars, it becomes much more muddied. Universalism generally does better with particulars. So when we're talking about the particulars of virtue, things like this, it's seemingly easier for theists to, when it comes to particulars, make good judgment calls on those particulars, whereas utilitarians use, and usually most progressives are some form of consequentialists, not all utilitarians, but they tend to kind of run awry there because they have a mathematical formula for utility, but it's not anything that's set in stone. Every single consequentialist distinction in what gives most or less, least amounts of utility is all over the place. We have no idea what that metric even is.
By a good judgment on particulars, what do you mean?
Let's take theft.
Okay.
Exactly.
This is a simple one.
Okay.
From your worldview, if a child is starving, is it okay for him to steal from a rich man?
We're reviewing a debate between President and a big papa fascist.
No.
Is the first.
No. Why?
I think that as a general rule, theft, for example, is something that is destructive. It involves some kind of putting forward of your own interest above your own notion of right or justice or whatever. At the very least, a neglect without any sort of conference with a society about what its rules should be or ought to be. That being said, if theft took place because somebody was starving under those conditions, I would absolutely turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah, no, I understand you might turn a blind eye to it, but I'm not understanding why it's morally incorrect. That's the part where I'm having a hiccup.
Why it's morally incorrect?
Why is it morally incorrect from your worldview for them to have actually stolen something they're starving from a rich man?
Well, I mean, from a moral point of view, I would question whether or not a moral system that supposedly derives from a just God who says the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these with respect to children would subject children to a rule that privileges the property ownership of a rich man over the life of a child.
Yeah, okay, but I don't understand. That's not your ethical system. That would be a criticism against mine. From your purview, why would it not be immoral or immoral?
Well, I just don't find the question particularly pressing for the simple reason that when we're talking about morals, regardless of where it's derived, fundamentally what we're talking about is a system of norms. But if we're presuming a case in which the most innocent members of society, the most vulnerable members of society, who society is specifically charged to raise and protect, are suffering to a lethal extent, it seems we're in an extreme situation in which norms don't seem to apply anymore. There's already been some kind of fatal degradation at that level.
Okay, yeah, maybe that's all true, but let's assume that it's not true.
Why?
Why would it be immoral for him to steal from your ethical lens?
Well, I'm not sure I would commit myself to the idea that it is immoral.
Yeah,
I
it
wouldn't
is.
necessarily say it's right, though. There's a difference
That's
there.
why when we get to particulars, like this particular, right, you had a hard time answering the question. Whereas universalism, it's much easier to answer those questions. It's not even saying that universalism is
I mean,
better.
just because you can have simple answers to questions, it doesn't mean that it's better. You know? Just because you can, like, come up with a simple or even simplistic answer that you can, you know, comfortably give, it doesn't mean that it's a better answer. You know? Doesn't mean that in the slightest.
Sure. I'm just giving you an example
Fair.
of how, when you're talking about particulars, universals are
I'm
easier
just not
to
convinced.
apply to particulars, and that's
But
why
just
people
because
tend to
you have
follow
an answer,
universalism
it means that it's
far
better.
more than they do consequentialism.
But suppose I simply said dogmatically that yes, it is always in all cases appropriate for somebody who has less to steal from somebody who has more, and I just take that as a dogmatic stance. Technically, it'd be very easy for me to answer that question, but I don't think you find it
Exactly.
very compelling.
There
Well,
we go.
I mean, let's assume I don't. But you can understand why most people would find universal claims to be compelling. because they're very easy to follow.
Yeah,
right?
but just
You're not
because
allowed to
something
murder
is
people
easy
ever.
doesn't mean it's
never,
correct.
ever, right? An unjustified
Right?
killing. You're not allowed to do that. Most people find that, whether it's particulars or not particulars, to be very easy to follow, right?
That's
This is why when you're talking about
That
the
doesn't mean
overview of
anything.
the ethical glue that kind of holds people together, they tend to go for universals. And this is where leftists
simple answers,
really have
simple
failed people.
solutions are
Progressives
not
have
always
really,
best
really
solutions.
failed people at this, because what they've done is they've introduced do as thou wilt. They don't have universals for conducts and how society should be run. Seems like porn is fine. It seems like
Porn
any
is
form
fine,
of sexual
yes.
degeneracy is fine, and it seems like decadence is fine. It seems like nobody gives a shit or wants to legislate away any of that. Even forms of corruption seem to be okay. Just depends on what their form is. So all of these things in decadence, it all seems to stem from the do as thou wilt
I'm not entirely sure
kind of
that's
ideology.
true. So, for example, you yourself run into constant arguments with people online about the appropriate role, for example, of women in subjection to men. Now, there are certain very strong and consistent ideas about autonomy, human dignity, and the equality of people, irrespective of sex and gender, that actually seems to be pretty stable across most leftist lines, mega communists excluded. It
Mega
doesn't seem to me like there's actually much difficulty dealing with such things as that at all. Now, you exclude those on the basis of highlighting things like pornography and what you call sexual degeneracy. But it seems to me that these are more or less equal in terms of like the way in which they address things. Systems that are simply interested in different things. Pornography is simply not of interest.
I agree. They're interested in different things.
True, but while pornography, for example, is not of interest to a great many leftists, not all, by the way, there are a great many, including myself, who are very aware of the pernicious elements of pornography as well as the industry that produces it. But leaving that aside, there is, by the same token, a high degree of concern with the subjugation of an entire half of the species. And the maltreatment of a large number of people who don't have traditional identities vis-a-vis sex, gender, etc., etc.
Okay, well, let's address
that you
these
are not
quickly.
concerned with.
Well, let's address these kind of point by
Sure.
point. First, it seems like you're saying, well, wait a second. Leftist progressives they do care about pornography and what's going on with pornography. If this was a Christian conservative nation with no progressives in it, do you think that we would have legal pornography someday?
Well, that's an interesting question, because at one point in time, I say this, I'm in Canada, but at one point in time, yours was a Christian conservative nation, and yet pornography
right.
somehow emerged from it.
Uh-oh.
Yes, this is due to Supreme Court rulings, not because the majority of the people wanted it.
But the
What do
people
you
got
know?
but the people got into the Supreme Court as a result of presidents who were elected by the people.
Yeah, but even the justices aren't elected,
True.
right? So you take a gamble
do you
with
know
some
what
of this
the
sometimes, but the way
majority
that
of the
a
people
justice
want?
can interpret this, if it was put up to a
Yeah,
popular
all the
vote,
beat 'em up arcade games
at
were
the
pretty
time,
challenging.
there's no possible way that pornography would
'Cause
be
they wanted
considered
to spend you
speech.
more
That's
money.
insanity. But this is a progressive doctrine. There's no
Wanted you
possible
to
way
spend
that
money.
conservatives in a conservative Christian nation, and you can see this in the more conservative Christian nations which exist right now, they're not allowing pornography. It's,
I mean,
it's
would
a no-go.
you
Changing
suggest that a majority of the American population would vote against its own constitution? Because if they,
Yes. Well, at this point, yes.
well, at this point,
What?
yes, but would you say so? I'm actually in the dark about this. Would you say so at the time that I'm actually unsure of the exact history of the legalization of this, but let's say there was a point in time at which it was put to a judge or to the Supreme Court, hey, we want to have these lewd images of individuals engaged in degenerate acts in our newspapers or magazines or whatever, and they decided yes. At that point in time, maybe a little bit prior to that, do you suppose that the majority of American citizens were actively hostile to their to the Constitution of the United States as such then? Because it seems to me that if they aren't, then there's a tacit consent to the decisions of the people who are put into places of power as a consequence of the ordering of that Constitution.
No, well, no. Wait a second. So there's a lot of presuppositions which are driven in here, and I understand that this is done in question form, but let me address some of these concerns. My point here is to say that if people were actually voting on these issues, right,
How do
just
you
like we
know?
see with gay marriage,
Sure.
when they actually voted on that issue, They did not say that. They did not vote for gay marriage, not even in progressive places like California. Okay, the Supreme Court made rulings on this, and that's what allowed it to go through.
Sure.
It's not the will of the people that this happened, and
Well,
it's
you
not
gotta-
the will
well,
of the
this is why
populace.
this is why I asked this question though, because it seems to me when you're talking about the will of the people, you're not just talking about what they would vote for given a specific plebiscite for a specific issue, because of course there's too many issues and too many decisions, and they're too fine grained for the
Right.
population as a whole to be taking part actively in every single one. You never get anything done. Moreover, it would be illegible to the vast majority of the population. It'd be too specific, too complex, etc., etc. It seems to me that when we're talking about the will of the people,
Like
what we're talking
like
about
the
specifically
Brexit
is
vote,
whether or not.
I mean, that sounds like you're for elitism.
No, not at all. Are
representative
you sure?
democracy. What?
It sounds
quite,
like you're saying
yeah.
the stupid plebs don't even understand what's going on.
Oh my
No,
god!
no, no,
These
this
issues
occurred-
are
this-
so
this-
granular and complex that they
Well, this
feeble minds
applies.
can't
This
comprehend them.
applies to even the most specialized bureaucrats, just because the issues of government are so complicated and so specific and so wide-ranging. Like we're not just talking about
Storm.
like broad decisions. Like for instance, should
I'm the one that
depictions
lost.
of the naked human body in coitus be allowed in publicly accessible media? We're talking about all of the decisions that lead into the selection of examples, the people who are responsible for making all the decisions in terms of who to admit to the court.
Like,
who
come
not to
on,
admit.
it's
no,
the
what
basics
happens
of-
is this. Supreme Court
It's
just
the basics of representative democracy. Is Big Papa Fascist against representative democracy because it's elitism?
justices are lifetime
Yeah.
nominated.
Sure.
Okay, as culture shifts, the viewpoint of these people tends to shift along with the culture. They don't tend to stay stagnant either. Or
Yes.
they can use older policy prescription or older worldviews or a more modernistic worldview in which to make these interpretations. Okay, but generally speaking, the Supreme Court justices, which are nominated at the time when the presidents of the nation nominated them, if you look at what they thought about degenerate issues, the public, they definitely were not voting in the president. So that in 30 years, the Supreme Court justice would go ahead and okay social degeneracy. That was not what the population was after
Social
all.
Well,
degeneracy.
grant all of that. But if they were not opposed to the Constitution that gave these judges the power to do this, in fact, if they tacitly supported the Constitution that gave these judges the power to make this decision, are they not also, and this is the general argument for the legitimacy of these judges' decisions,
Oops.
including the ones recently that overturned
Left
Roe v.
side.
Wade, are they not tacitly also agreeing to the decisions of those judges since they have invested those judges with their will because it is transmitted through the Constitution to them?
No, I don't think so. And especially if you have judges who are instituted who can be there cross-generationally. No, I don't think that this is done even within the spirit of what the Constitution is or what people think it is. I don't even-
Also, Real Democracy, as a great article once wrote in Poland, is not just about pandering to what the majority wants. It's about picking and choosing representatives that will defend those who are the most vulnerable in society, the minorities. Okay, that's what a real democracy does. Like, it makes sure that a majority cannot just bully vulnerable minorities.
I even think most people are aware that the Supreme Court has lifetime nominees on it. I don't even think most people are aware of how the political system works, to be perfectly honest with
Are
you. I don't even
you?
think that they know.
Horrifically,
I
I've
think
met
that-
people in my state who don't know who the Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah,
was
it
10 years ago.
doesn't surprise me. Most people don't know.
They're sounding a bit like an
I-
elitist.
Didn't? Yeah, exactly. Well said, President Sunday. You do sound like an elitist now. Bam! Your own argument coming back to haunt you. I suck at this game. We're changing game.
Andrew.
Most people don't know this. Well, it's not elitism. It's just kind of
It is.
stating an obvious fact. which is that
Oh,
most-
so now it's stating an. Oh, okay. Okay. When President Sunday was doing it, it was elitism. But when. Okay. All right. Sure. Okay.
most
I
people
agree.
don't even know
I
how the
agree.
governing system operates. But when given a
Mhm.
choice for degeneracy or against degeneracy, they seem to move to against degeneracy. Even
Oh.
the leftist elitist scumbags seem to do this, Sunday. For instance, you don't want people to walk around naked, right? You would say that this in some way violates some social norm or some bullshit, right? So you would enforce the general morality and tell them they have to wear clothes, wouldn't you?
Probably not. Although, like, depending on who you asked,
Wait,
walking
no?
around naked being a
You
great
wouldn't?
many. Beg your pardon?
You just let people walk around naked?
I probably have some objection to people walking around naked. Yeah.
Oh, you would, yeah.
I would,
You would
yeah.
have some objection to it, right? So why though? What are they doing wrong?
Well, that's an excellent question. So, for example, there was once upon a time a fine that you could be charged for appearing on a beach as a woman with your midriff showing. At one point, with your legs showing. I don't know if there was a fine for that, but at a certain point, that was
Give it,
heavily
please.
discouraged. It's not clear to me that there is an objective threshold beyond which public nudity is acceptable or beyond which it is immoral. Moreover, it does seem that it's very contingent on a set of attitudes that are themselves largely accidental.
Yep.
I don't think you would be particularly offended at a woman not wearing a scarf in
So,
public, for instance.
Wait a
yes?
second.
Yeah.
Wait a second. You're saying again that your system fails when it comes to particulars.
No,
No,
it
not at all.
doesn't.
Well, this is a particular. But you seem to think that there's an arbitrary threshold.
Yeah,
right?
there is.
When you
Well, I
could
put that
easily,
back- I
you
put that
could
back
easily
in
make a
your-
universal threshold. You could just say that you have to be covered except for your arms and your legs, for instance. I don't think there'd be any objection to that.
I could,
You
but I could
you
also
make all of these types of things, and then it wouldn't be
Yeah.
arbitrary anymore, right?
Well, I mean, fair enough. I mean, it would be entirely arbitrary in the sense that at some point somebody would have chosen to mark these things out and to assign.
Yeah, but all
an
arbitrary
appropriate
means
and
is
inappropriate
absent a
condition.
system, right?
No, no.
So arbitrary is absent a
Arbitrary means very, very specifically by choice, by decision. So not absent a system. Arbitrary means literally, that's why we call judges arbiters. It's the result of human
Based
judgment.
on random choice within a personal whim rather than any reason or system.
Well,
That's
we
arbitrary.
use the term arbitrary to refer to the randomness of it precisely because it doesn't have legitimacy, because it is the result of choice.
It's a result of personal whim rather than a system or reason. But then
agree.
every single system that's ever been implemented was done
I could play it,
arbitrarily,
yeah.
I guess, by that metric.
Is it on Steam?
Yeah, to a certain degree, yeah.
So, I
Undoubtedly.
mean, that it just seems like it's a point that has no merit. What I'm saying is that when it comes to particulars, again, in this particular case, you're
Well, I
saying,
suppose,
listen,
if I may, I
this
suppose,
is super. This
yeah.
is super complex because it's arbitrary, and now that we have a particular here, we don't know where the threshold should be. It's the same kind of arguments which are used against pornography.
Well, I
Whereas
wouldn't even say it's
universalism-
complex. I wouldn't even-
Universalism, we
yeah.
could make it simple,
Yeah.
right?
I gotcha. I wouldn't even say it's complex. I think the point, though, is that if you're asking me to specifically target specific things for regulation, given the fact that the resolution at which we're targeting things seems to be on the basis of some people's decisions here and there, which when we reflect on the history of people making such decisions, we know are not
Exactly.
consistent throughout history. We know they change radically with time and place. I would question whether or not it's a condition of failure that a system of ethics doesn't specifically target all of the same things for control. Maybe I deliberately allow a wide berth for different types of expression and configuration and so on and so forth. But I do so deliberately. I regard certain, like, let's say, mediums between different extremes, total nudity, full-on burqa, let's say, in which there is an appropriate range of types of dress that I will allow. And
Like
maybe
a
some of them
scale.
make me uncomfortable, but there's a difference between what makes me comfortable and what's appropriate to legislate for other people, right? Or for what makes for like a stable society, so on and so forth. It's not clear to me that hyper-specifying these particular levels for regulation, or the failure to do so, necessarily actually constitutes a failure of a system. In fact, a system may work
Exactly.
Which
better.
is why,
Yeah.
which is why, when it comes to particulars, the progressive left is such an objective failure, and why it is that we can't seem to regulate out things in a
Because it
society.
doesn't want to hyper control every single aspect of people's lives? That is
which we
what it
don't
is.
like, that we want to get regulated out, that people have vast agreement that we want out of here, that seem to move into the systems and unification of both the ethics and the religion, which most reflects the population. But the problem is we quibble over the particulars for the universals. And it's like, we don't really have to do that. It's not necessary to do that. And so what Christians would posit is this. We would say, okay, I understand that you want to have kind of this granular, nuanced particularism system, which
Right.
is on some kind of scale and it becomes kind of an irreducibly complex issue because of this scale and this type of thing. Very difficult for us to figure out where the line is, so we just kind of allow it, right, or whatever. I don't see why that's a better system or a more reasonable system.
Because it allows more freedom, because it oppresses people less, because it doesn't judge people on things that are just ridiculously arbitrary.
Or a better, or in any way superior to a system that has universal codes for conduct, how people need to behave inside of society, or why it is that we should allow secularists to maintain power instead of Christians maintaining power. I don't see what makes you better qualified for that, or why it's a better society because you're in
Because
charge.
not
That's-
everybody's a
I
Christian.
completely agree. So I think the question then is, given the fact, and we'll just lay on an additional piece of trivia, given the fact that at one point in time Christianity itself was subject to the exact same criticism, namely it involved a breakdown of social norms that were considered sacrosanct by the surrounding culture.
Well, that's happened again and again and again.
Oh, it has indeed. That's not a mark against it or for it, but the point is that this has taken place before. How do we select which resolution of arbitrary control is the best one?
You mean when we get down to the particulars?
Well, not just
No.
down to the particulars. See, what I'm trying to
Well,
highlight
no,
here.
I get it. This is
Oh,
this
well,
is a good
just very
question.
quickly, because I just want to make sure
Yeah.
that you do before you press on. The issue is not how do we select what the right kinds of particular judgments are. The question is, for me at least, how do we even decide at what level of granularity are we controlling for the particulars?
Right.
So let's kind of dive into this.
Okay.
So this is the problem with this. Is I'm not going to say this. I am going to say it, but essentially it's a fallacious argument because it's irreducible.
It wasn't an
complexity.
argument.
It's
It was
why
a question.
can't we have this system? We can't have this system because if we get into kind of the granularity, we don't know where one thing ends and another thing begins, and therefore neither thing can exist. That's a fallacy from irreducible complexity. But I'm going to actually answer this question because it doesn't really matter ultimately. Ultimately, what I'm saying, what I'm postulating, is
Okay.
that Christians are looking at this. You could call it Christian futurism, and what we're saying is ultimately, whether or not leftists are going to say, well, these issues are so complex and they have kind of so many
Thank you.
nuances that there's really no way for us to come to a resolution. I think the left is thinking themselves out of existence, that progressives have thought, or think literally through their own policies, are kind of exterminating themselves. They're really only
What?
in power in the least densely populated places on planet Earth. I mean, basically, that's the only places that they are and where they have institutional power. But they seem to think that because of this institutional power, that they're safe, that they don't have anything to worry about. The problem is they have to utilize mass migration in order to replace their kind of population centers. So the migrants that they're pulling from are theists. It's a big problem that they have, is that the migrants they're pulling from are theists. And I think that over the next 100 years, 150 years, that the left is going to ultimately have to crumble anyway because of their materialist outlook. They're not
I don't
able
know.
to maintain their systems long term. They have no longevity. They can't convince people to have children. And they also seem to want to convince people to have as much promiscuous sex. So basically, they can have the activity without the reproduction side of it. Now, theists have the opposite view of this. They're like, you can't do the reproductive
Can we,
activity.
we're
unless
about to
it's-
go down a rabbit hole. I need to
Hang
run
on,
to
we're
the
not going down a
washroom.
rabbit hole. I'm going to tie it
But I
together.
desperately need to run to the washroom. Can we, you hold that thought for like 2 minutes?
Yeah, I can.
Thanks, appreciate it.
All right. Well, in the meantime, while he's doing that, I want to remind you guys, please send those super chats in. We will get to all of them. I see Patch
You should
Garris has
edit
sent
out
in
this.
a few. Trust me, bro.
Oh, come
we'll
on.
get to all of them. We'll
Edit this
address
out.
all of your super chats at the end. And it looks like Mr. E is MIA right now. So if you want to call in, you can still tag the other mods in the Discord, and they'll be able to get you a stream link
Edit
so
it
you can
out.
call in directly and ask your question to either debater.
Oh.
But got about 35 minutes left in the open dialogue portion of this debate. Hope you guys have enjoyed it so far. It's been really easy on my end. I haven't actually had to moderate anything. I've just been talking shit in chat.
That's because President
So,
Sunday has
thank
been
you,
so
Andrew,
nice.
and thank you, President Sunday, for making it easy thus far. But yeah, it's been a good debate. So hope you guys are enjoying. And again, relax, Patch Duris. We're going to read all of the super chats that you sent in, even the ones where you're whining and crying.
I mean, I guess President Sunday could be said to be winning. I don't think he's doing anything wrong.
Yeah, I've been busy banning people. Yeah, well, okay. President Sunday's back. Continue, gentlemen.
Yeah. By the way, Sunday, I do appreciate. Can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I know
Yep.
you weren't. I know you weren't feeling well today. I appreciate you coming on. Zen isn't either. There's been a bug.
Yeah, I
going
was
on,
talking with him
nailing
before the show
everybody.
started. Yeah.
Yeah, so I appreciate you coming on
I don't
anyway.
feel-
But anyway,
Show must go on.
so that we can get back to this, I
Please.
guess what I'm looking to see is if you actually have any criticisms itself of Christian nationalism or Christian populism. What is the actual criticisms here?
Have
Is
you
I feel like
played
I've
this
laid
game?
out a pretty good grounding system for what it is that we're after. And what my proposal is that cross-generationally, we don't have to do that much, except just kind of have children and try to give them as much of our value structure we possibly can, because I think that your ideology is going to go extinct. That's what I think. The numbers seem to show this. So,
Well, I mean, once upon a time, not so long ago, the numbers were showing the opposite. So I guess my criticism, such as it is, would be
when were they showing the opposite? Because everything that I look at shows the scale from the 1800s current that the birth rate has done this.
well,
Like a rock.
the birth rate has done that, but church attendance has not done that. And I think
It
one
has.
of the things that you're well, sorry, actually it has. You're correct. That's what I mean. One of the things that you're kind of up against here is sort of twofold. The first is more a question. The second is what I at least perceive to be a inherent contradiction in the project with Christianity itself. The first one is that let's presume you're right, and that Christians will continue to reproduce in numbers vastly, outnumbering those of their secular and otherwise competitors. And let's assume that they are very successful, at least for the formative years of their life, in imbuing them with Christian attitudes and Christian ethics and Christian belief and so on and so forth. Once again, at one point in time, that was a state of affairs that already obtained. And yet, nonetheless, a vast population of secularists and atheists and skeptics and various degrees of Christians who are otherwise not as entirely
I don't like this
naively
game.
on board with the whole program before it came about.
Okay, I don't like this game. I'm sorry. I hate this game. I don't mean to be mean. I just hate this game. We're playing Spyro. By the way, it seems Hungary under Orban seems to lose people at church attendance. There is a shrinking number of church attendance from the recent decades. There's been a shrinking number of people going to the church in Poland as well, actually.
And so the immediate question that I have is, it's what Shigure says in
I'm
No
gonna
Country
try
for
it
Old Men.
again,
It's like,
but
if the rule you followed led you to this.
I don't know
avoidance
what
was
to
the rule.
do in this game.
How do you...
Like, the enemy just keeps avoiding me and just squashing me, and I got annoyed. I'm sorry. I'm gonna try it again later. You did get it for me, so I'm not just gonna reject it outright, but it did annoy me. It did annoy me a lot, that game. Yeah, I think I'm gonna try it off stream and learn how to play it at least. You got 3 debates to go through. So,
How do you evade the occurrences that led to this simply by repopulating
President Sunday is
your
too
country
nice.
with,
I don't have
raised
much.
Christians?
Well, actually, you guys are the key. So, from my worldview, this actually makes sense. You guys are the kind of one of the best things that ever happened to Christianity, whether you know it or not.
Who?
We had a Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation is what led to kind of all these different cults who started pushing a lot of this egalitarian principles and a lot of these kinds of degenerate
People-
principles and things like this. A lot of the sexual liberation people think come from the 60s. It really didn't. It came from the Protestant cults in the 1800s, and they were the ones who kind of proliferated degeneracy
Oh,
through their kind of
Protestants are
sexual cult
degenerate.
behavior. You can find all sorts of references to this. My wife's book, Occult Feminism, she tracked all of these different independent cults down, many of them which existed in New York, and their sexual practices, which were
your wife
absolute
did a book
insanity.
called Feminism.
This Reformation happened because the Catholic Church, which was not in unison with the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Church, they were doing things they weren't supposed to do. And so, of course, Martin Luther broke away from that. But remember that this was recent. The Protestant Reformation was recent. But Protestantism was able to spread in the West almost like a cancer, like a plague.
Oh,
And
damn.
because they didn't have really good, coherent theology, secularists were kind of able to always infiltrate and kind of destroy this theology. And what's
So all
happening
of the
right now
degeneracy
is
is
you're
because
seeing
of Protestants.
Protestantism on the decline. And you're seeing Protestantism on the decline globally, except for a few different sects. And so I'm actually for this. I'm actually glad that it's being decimated, because the actual churches, which have ecclesiastical authority and ecclesiastical methods
I don't
for
know.
law,
It
and
feels like
believe in the concept of
Protestantism
syntheia,
is to
are growing like
it
weeds.
feels like
And
Protestants
this
are
is what the
doing
trends show.
fine in the
So
US.
it
but
actually does
maybe-
not surprise me that because there's a discord in theology that things go haywire, but they tend to correct themselves, especially as people fall away from these institutions for more traditional outlooks.
But I put the ball back into your court, because the problem there is that the original Catholic Church, which had all these advantages that you say they now
Split.
have, as opposed to the
It's split.
Protestant sects that emerged from them, nonetheless gave birth to that same Protestantism. They were vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
They were vulnerable to internal corruptions that
True.
sowed the seeds of their own destruction. So,
Yeah, everything. Well, it didn't sow the seeds of their destruction, ultimately.
well,
Yeah.
But-
certainly the destruction of their hegemony. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but here's the kind of poison pill to this, is that there was a new world to escape away from the church, too. Unless you're going to colonize fucking Mars in the next 100 years, which I doubt, there's no new world to escape to. You're not going to live under ocean, and you're not going to live in the clouds.
Hold
You're going to
on.
be right here, and we've discovered everything.
Hold on. The schism of the church happened before the US was colonized. So what gives, Andrew?
On land, basically, that there is to discover. There's no new continents we're going to come across, and
on.
Antarctica is not in the next 150 years going to be populated by humanity. So there is no escape. There is no kind of
escape.
Puritan running from the Anglican persecution of the church, and they're able to find brand new land in which to culminate their ideology. That's all gone.
I mean, certainly, but the reason why they were
That
able,
was the advantage, though, right? And this
well, not the
advantage is
sole
now gone.
advantage. I mean, one of the reasons why, for example, they were able to take America was precisely because there was already a dominant naval power in the region. No, like we're England was not Catholic.
Exactly.
It was Anglican.
It was Anglican.
Yeah.
Yes, but
Yeah,
my,
but
my
that is Catholic. It's just the king's the king's the Pope in Anglicanism.
But
So the
it's
king
still
wanted to be able to get divorced, so he started his own Catholic church.
no. He
where-
started his own church. Like this is like saying that the Orthodox Church is basically Catholic, but it just has the patriarch instead of the Pope. That's just silly. The Anglican Church is not Catholic.
He became the Pope, essentially. That's Anglicanism.
it seems like a worse schism than Protestantism generally.
Well, I mean, not really. They're still, they still have like a relationship with him, and no, not really. It's not the same thing as a complete and total. So we're not saying
Yeah.
Orthodox Catholics don't even say that Protestants aren't Christians, right? We kind of grudgingly give them that. What we're saying is that they're following the wrong theology and the wrong doctrine, so ultimately they end up
Orthodox
with really
Catholics?
bad conclusions, just like anybody who follows bad theology and bad doctrines.
Certainly, but it
But
seems
ultimately, go
it
ahead.
seems the argument you're making right now is more practical than ethical. It's not like we're not belying an ethical argument, but it seems like we're really situated on the practical right now. There is a survival
Yeah, so
advantage.
Christian futurism is utilizing the practical
Yeah.
to get to the ends of the ethical, yes.
But specifically by the ends of the ethical, we mean the domination of the sect. So what I'm kind of highlighting here is it seems to me that at the very least in this conversation so far, we haven't, and maybe you want to provide this, we haven't really been provided with an argument for why it would have staying power. Maybe you reproduce more Christians, but how do you make them stay Christian, either in this generation or in future
Well,
generations?
let's
True.
assume that I'm wrong and it only has 1 year's worth of staying power, right? What I'm outlining is a goal. And the
Right.
goal is to move towards this system because I don't think that there's anything morally reprehensible or wrong with it.
I don't think it makes sense Because it's like calling the Orthodox Church the Eastern European Catholicism. You know? Ukrainian Catholic is Orthodox Church. Russian Catholic. No. I'm sorry. That makes no sense. Sorry.
And so what I'm looking for is a criticism for what my goals here are that are actually wrong, or criticisms for why it would be immoral for me to move towards those goals, because I don't feel like you have any of those criticisms. I don't feel like you think that there's anything wrong with me saying that Christians should be in charge, that Christians ought to be able to rule how they see fit. They ought to be able to implement their moral systems how they see fit. What's the actual
Christian?
problem with that?
Well, I think, oddly enough, I think you do specifically have that problem to hand. Namely, I'll quote you back to you. You want to take the largest global tribe, Christians, and then tell them it's okay to have power.
Yeah.
One of the problems with this is that you're not commanded as Christians to have power. You're commanded to spread, not reproduce, but to spread the gospel to the nations of the world. And in addition,
We're not commanded to reproduce.
you are told to be fruitful
Reproduce.
and multiply in Genesis, but not Christianity. To be clear, you're supposed to preach the gospel, not fuck the gospel, right?
Did the apostles? What was the first thing that the apostles of Jesus Christ did with his message?
What did the first thing they did with his message?
Yeah, they took it to all four corners of the earth, right?
Oh yeah, that's the Great Commission. So you're talking about. I thought you were talking
not
about
not only
particulars.
that, but the churches which they established gained great authority.
Oh my
inside
God,
those
Spyro
lands,
is becoming difficult.
especially in Ethiopia, places like this. The churches
suck.
became dominant powers, and there was absolutely
Oh,
nothing wrong
well,
with
I'd-
that.
I'd be-
And
I'd
through
be
the
a little-
structure, through the structure of
Yeah.
the church, it's very clear that there is no problem with Christians ruling. What is the actual problem with that? And this is for my issue with secularists. I've
Well,
never
it's
found
twofold.
a secularist who could tell me why there's an issue.
It's twofold, and I argue this not as a secularist in this
Christians are
case.
race.
The twofold
True.
would be the church is the body
Christians
of Christ.
are
It's
right.
not an institution that is enforced by governmental sanction, and so there seems to be a little bit of a blurring of the lines here, in which the church is conflated with that institution which claims the name of the church.
What do you mean?
successfully
The
in
church
religion.
itself, via ecclesiastical law, is its own governmental bodies. It has its own cardinals and its own bishops, and it has its own governing ecclesiastical courts. It has everything. It's a governing body. And these systems were laid down almost at the foundation, and then through multiple
Was it?
ecumenical councils were refined.
What I lose
So
all my
no,
life.
Well,
there
no,
has
because
been-
it
there has
had-
been
it had-
ecclesiastical authority forever.
Well, slow down. It had the power, for example, to determine its own doctrine, how it inducted and how it selected its members, and how it chose to go about its business of organizing and teaching and so on and so forth. But it didn't have the power over life, death, and mammon that, for example, a modern state has. And I think one of the things you're up against here is that
Yes,
when you are
it did.
commanded,
Look at the Justinian Code. And when Christianity took over the Byzantine Empire,
did
it
Christianity
absolutely-
Did Christianity take over the empire? Or did the empire take over Christianity? That's a complicated question.
No, definitely Christianity took over the empire for sure, and the Justinian Code, which is implemented there, they absolutely for 1100 years ruled.
But the
with
church took
a
on
Christian ethic.
the church took on the specific ranking structure that you're referring to. It took that on from the Romans. They didn't have those same rankings prior
Before.
to that. This was a
The
kind
original
of-
apostles were bishops. What you know what I mean? Like, what do you mean?
Well, they're
Yes, there was-
retroactively referred to as such, but they weren't.
Yeah, listen. They clearly there's a hierarchical order within Christianity, has been since.
There's a reason why there's no
inception.
reference in the New Testament to bishops, right?
What do you mean?
Uh-oh. What do you mean, what I...
What are you talking about?
Well, the apostles, maybe I'm mistaken about this, but I don't believe they were actually referred to in the actual texts of the New Testament as bishops. I think these were,
Yeah, but listen,
like, for example,
Well,
like the first pope, for instance. That is that's a
that happened
retroactive
way later.
designation.
There's
Yes.
there was never a pope. There was
But
never supposed to be a pope.
what I mean though is that
Oh,
well,
so there was never supposed to be a
case in
pope.
point, if you will, if we're going to accept that as a thesis. I mean, like, one of the problems you're looking at there is the organizational structure. Therefore, seems to
Yeah,
ape not the
Jacob the
early
Great.
church,
Hello,
but
welcome
the
to the
actual
stream.
structure of Roman rule. In which case, I ask again: does it not seem like the spirit of the Roman Empire has overcome has overcome the church in this case. It seems like its form and its structure and how it behaves is like an imperial cult more than the house churches that gave birth to it.
Yep.
Yeah, like like right now you have a situation where you have the Vatican in charge of a
Yeah, I
de
just
facto
pulled it up.
state.
In Paul's last letter, yeah, he did mention a bishop.
Did he mention a bishop?
Yeah.
Was that a translational choice by the editor, or?
I mean, it may have
Doesn't
been but it's
matter, I just
referring
thought-
to the same thing that we're referring to, right?
Well,
Which is the
well,
reference to it's the reference to station. Like
well, here's
that's
the
what we're
here's
talking
the
about.
sure, but here's the catch. What a station means is going to be massively inflected by whether or not, for example, you refer to a pope as a pope or a pope as a president. Yeah, or
well, let's assume. Okay, hang on.
an
Let's assume
apostle
it's
as a
all,
pope, as it were.
Let's assume it's all bullshit and it's all fake. Like it's all.
Oh, I'm not even. I'm actually relying
I
on
mean,
it
let's
not
just
being
assume
so.
it though. Let's just assume it.
But I'd rather not.
Give
But
me the
continue,
most
please.
granted argument I possibly could. Is it's
All
all
right.
made up and fake, right? What would be the actual moral objection to Christians ruling? What would be the actual moral problem with that?
And it creates
Well, there wouldn't be
oppression.
one from the outside, but internally you're contradicting your own ethical system. I was going
I
to.
don't see
I was
how.
going to.
You haven't shown me a contradiction.
Well, I was about
that's
to.
for sure.
I was about
Go
to,
ahead.
very quickly. Because I was elaborating on
Thank
the
you,
first point. that I brought up. But
Jacob
with
the
respect to
Great.
this one, telling
Stand
the
back
largest
for
global
good
tribe it's okay to
for
take
now.
power.